Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar, which today is Storytelling and Story Writing for Cambridge English Young Learners. I'm very pleased to welcome Karen Saxby as this afternoon's presenter. Karen Saxby has produced a wealth of material for younger learners of English, with recent published works including Fun for Starters, Movers and Flyers, Story Fun, and Kept for Schools Trainer. Karen left the English classroom to focus on a full-time career as a writer of teaching and testing material with a particular interest in producing material for young learners. She has been a consultant for the production of EFL material and the development of language test formats. Karen regularly gives talks and delivers workshops to teachers in various countries. So, over to you, Karen.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our webinar today. I spoke at the IATEFL conference this year about storytelling and story writing as well, but today my focus will be more on how using story pictures can help you to prepare your young learners for their starters, movers or flyers story-based reading, writing and speaking tests. But also, if your class isn't taking these tests, I hope by the end of this webinar you'll have a few more fun, creative and useful ideas for your English language lessons. So wherever I've visited, some teachers have said that their young learners find it difficult to tell a story. Well, the current tests have storytelling tasks at movers and flyers levels. That's A1 and A2, and next year there'll be a task where learners have to write about a picture, a story picture at movers, and also write a story to go with a 3-picture cartoon at flyers. So now it's even more important that we think of ways to help our students feel happier about doing this. So here's a photo of some children I ran a storytelling workshop with. You can see that I've used lots of real objects to help learners come up with some story ideas. I'll talk a bit more about this activity later. I just love the photograph. Okay, so let's look at what I hope to cover today. First, we'll think about stories and what they are and why we enjoy them. Then why story texts and pictures help young learners learn and remember new language almost subconsciously. Then we'll look at some of the story-based tasks that starters, movers and flyers learners need to do and see how we can use storytelling and story making, story writing activities to help them feel more confident about doing these tasks. That's really important. So I'll also be giving you some ideas about bringing creative, collaborative and communicative work into the classroom. If we're asking learners to write about a story picture or tell or write a short story about some cartoon pictures in the tests, then of course they need to hear or read story texts in the classroom to help them prepare for that. We can't expect learners to tell or write a story if they haven't read or listened to one in class at the level that they're supposed to be writing at. So before we look at how to help learners prepare for these tasks and make the idea of telling or writing a story less scary, let's think about why using stories in our lessons might be a good idea anyway. So first, let's just simplify the idea of what a story is. Stories aren't just long texts we read in books. They can also be, for example, a Facebook message about what we did or are doing. We might tell stories about what's been happening to our friends on the phone. So we can say that stories are narratives or accounts of events that we think might just be interesting for a listener or a reader. They are experiences that we talk or write about because we think they might entertain or inform other people. So stories, and this is really important I think, stories don't have to be a super long, clever, creative, detailed texts. Learners really need to understand that. We don't want to frighten them. So here you can see a picture. It shows part of a story. Let's just look at it for a couple of seconds. And then we'll read the first text about this under the picture. You might write this kind of story text on a social media site or tell it to a friend on your phone. It's about a film you saw, because film plots are stories too, so you're telling your friend about what happened in the film. So imagine this picture was on the cinema screen. How could you complete this simple sentence? If you have an idea, please type it in the chat box. There's no single right answer. All your answers will be correct because this is your story. And please imagine that you are A1 or A2 learners, not J.K. Rowling. So how can we finish this sentence? We saw a funny film yesterday about a boy and a dragon. Okay, that's a great answer. About a boy and lots of books. Yeah, about a boy who lived in the countryside. That's a little bit higher. About a boy and a big tree. About a boy and a black bird. Oh yes, yes, there's a bird on the ground next to him. Thank you very much. Okay, so the second text looks more like the start of a traditional story. How can we finish this sentence? Again, remember the level. You choose a way. Sort of, about A1 level. Ben was tired. He sat down under a tree and thought, I wish I had 100 books to read. And suddenly, what happened? I wish I had 100 books to read. And suddenly, hundreds of books fell from the tree. Yeah, good use of past tense there. And suddenly, it rained books. Suddenly, he had lots. Lots of books fly. Yes, lots of books are flying. Okay, thank you. So let's imagine the third text is part of a conversation you had on the phone. I don't know how many of you plant onions, but let's use our imaginations here. How can we finish this sentence? So in the picture we can see the boy was planting onions perhaps. But here this is your story, something you're saying on the phone. I was planting my onions yesterday when it started to rain, so I hid under a tree. Thank you. Yep. So I put my raincoat on. So yeah, I put on my coat, got my umbrella out. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. So these are simple texts, but we are still writing or telling stories here. So we can take the stress out of writing or telling stories by just using a single picture, a nice, a creative, fun picture, and putting together some very simple texts for learners to complete about it. That's a really good first step. Another idea is to ask, depending on the level of your class, simple or more complex questions about the picture. For example, what colour are the boy's shoes? That's a starters question. At the same level, starters, that's pre-A1, you could say, tell me about this boy. That's a new question for starters in 2018. They could say, for example, he's 9, he's happy, he's under a tree, he likes reading. All of those are simple responses, and they are great answers for that pre-A1 level. At movers, you could ask questions in the same way or write a simple sentence about the picture with the last word or words missing, as we've done here. Or you could tell movers students that this is a cinema screen and ask, what's the film about? Pairs or groups could decide and then feed back into the open class. And everyone's answer will be right, of course, because they'll be using their own ideas. We're just encouraging students to engage and have fun with pictures at this stage. At A2, that's flyers level, groups could perhaps write 2 or 3 sentences about the imagined film. Or you could tell your class to write a text message to the boy. Pairs could decide what one particular book is about and then present their ideas to the class. And at all levels, learners could just describe the picture using present simple and continuous tenses. That is extremely useful practice, as we'll see. There's an ancient Persian storytelling practice called parde kani. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. This uses one picture, the parde, and the narrator, the pardeda. He tells the story by referring to different parts of the picture. You could also do this, but ask your students to help you tell the story by choosing how to fill in gaps. So right now we'll just create a simple story about the picture. So fast typing here. Write your suggestions for the gaps. I'll read one out. Listen carefully. There'll be clues about the kind of word we need, I think. So Ben wasn't very old. He was only, what age is he? 7. Great. He loved working in the field and growing, what did he like growing? Carrots. Brilliant. Leeks. Golly, that's a good word. Onions. And Ben enjoyed reading too, but Ben didn't have any books, great, at home. So one day last week, not on Monday, but on, you want a day of the week? Tuesday, Ben found a silver cup on the ground. Ben held the cup and said, I want 100 new books to read. I really want to learn about, you choose, gorillas, everything. Why not? Africa, fantastic. The silver cup listened to Ben, and suddenly 100 books fell from the sky. Ben was really happy and said, what did he say? You choose. Hooray! Wow! Thank you very much. Okay, that's the end of our mini story. All of these first step supported activities will help your learners to become more used to working with story pictures and seeing models of ways to talk or to write about them. Okay, let's take a moment to think a bit more about stories and why they're such useful teaching resources. So I'm just departing a little bit now. So when reading or listening to a good story in class, children escape their real world and enter an imagined one, a world where there's no anxiety about homework or word lists or anything else. So when they read or listen to a story, children and adults, of course, travel into the story. There they construct their own meanings of words and understanding of behavior, good or bad, and of events, scary, dangerous, fun. When I said meanings of words, I mean, if they say it's a sunny day, they imagine that picture in their heads. So they also, of course, relate to certain characters, and they might imagine pictures of people or places too, for example. So they are adding mentally all kinds of details to the story all the time. So their minds, left and right brain, are very, very active. This is a key point. So they're not just mentally jumping between L2 and L1 words. They're using several different kinds of mental processes. As I said, they sort of attach themselves to characters they like or relate to. When you next watch a film, which is of course another story form, take a moment to see what's happening to your face or body when something sad or happy or worrying happens. You might find that you're copying your favourite character's expression. You might laugh, frown, sigh, or even cry, of course. I'm sure that you've cried at the ends of films, for example. Emotional reactions and deeper mental processes which are triggered during an interesting, exciting story or scary film, for example, is what helps the brain to remember the language that is heard or read. In fact, research seems to prove that language is learnt almost by accident. I'll say this another way. Both sides of the brain are busy. Children are not only processing language, but thinking about relationships, they're judging behavior, they're learning about life, and they're guessing what's going to happen next. All of that, perhaps subconsciously. All of these processes help the language to become more meaningful and more memorable. Sometimes we might even imagine we are in the story. When someone talks, we might call out an answer. I know I've done that on the radio during a play, for example. We invest our own language into the story too. I've got a funny little story for you here. My mum, she's 87. She loved Frank Sinatra when she was a young woman. She said that when she watched him in romantic films, she always imagined he was speaking directly to her. She often whispered back to him. And fans, of course, love pop stars for the same reason. The words they sing, which is another story form, we call them lyrics, of course, are sung uniquely to them in their imagination sometimes. Okay, so stories are powerful texts. So returning to our learners, we know they instinctively enjoy working with stories, just like they do in their first language. Stephen Krashen, the famous educationalist, thinks that we should remember how we learnt our first language and adopt some of the ways that we do that in our second language teaching. So I'm talking a little bit about that here too. When they listen or hear a story in class, for me, this is my belief, ideally they should do this stress-free. So personally, I prefer not to ask pre-reading questions, but that is just my opinion. You might work in a very different way. You know your class better than anybody. I suggest, however, that children should just experience the story the first time they read or listen to it. Experience it. That's where the learning, I think, is almost accidental, as I've said before. Good illustrations should help your learners to understand the story too. They don't have to know, they don't have to understand every word in order to enjoy the story. When the story is over, you can list your questions or cover the grammar points and perhaps read it again. Then you can use the story to help create other activities in the ways that I suggest here. I'll just give you a minute to read that last part of the last paragraph, the last 3 lines there, the role play, artwork, etc. Okay, got that? Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So let's now refocus and think a bit more about the tasks in the tests now. Starters to begin with. Starters, or pre-A1 learners, see a picture and have to talk about different parts of the picture in the speaking test. At the moment, this year, they'll be asked 4 questions. They'll be asked, what's that? The examiner will actually point to something. They'll be asking a what colour question, a how many question, and a what doing question. So asking simple questions like these about any imaginative picture will help. Next year, starters candidates will also be asked to say more about something they can see. Whoops, something's happened there. Let me go back. Next year, starters candidates will also be asked to say more about something they can see in the picture. The tell me about the blue monster here. 2 or 3 short sentences are great as answers. Can you enter some expected answers at pre-A1 about this blue monster? Really, really simple ones. What can you say about that blue monster? Any ideas? He's drawing, yes. It's drawing. It's blue, of course. What's it wearing on its head? It's on the floor. Yep. It's wearing a red hat. Super. Thank you very, very much. Okay, let's go to the next slide now. So let's look at starters read-write story task. So learners here see a 3-picture story and have to answer questions about what's happening, about the story. Their words are just 1 word long. You might not be able to read the smaller text here, so I'm showing the questions in larger font. I said 1 word answers. You'll see that in the test, if more than 1 word is needed, the words will appear at the beginning of the answer line. So this writing task is a lot like the current speaking test, really, answering simple questions about not one big fun question, about one big fun picture, but a series of 3 smaller pictures that show a simple story. So again, as a first step, you could use any picture and write simple questions about it on the board like these, using what, who, where and how many interrogative question starters for learners to answer. Do you get that? Okay, great. Let's move to the next slide. Here's another starters picture story. I'm sorry the images are so small. That might be a little bit difficult to see. A starter's tip, by the way, when learners must answer a what doing question, they should just write the ing word. So here in picture 2, the question is, what is the bird doing? You can see that. A good answer would be flying. Nothing more complicated than that. Flying is to fly is a starter's word for those of you who don't know that. Okay, so it's on the starters word list, so they should know that. So moving on, for movers, so for A1 students, let's just look at this speaking task to begin with. You can see it's a 4-picture cartoon. Learners need to tell the story. The examiner introduces the story by talking about the first picture. It's really, really important that learners listen carefully to this introduction, because they'll see and also hear the names of the children and also perhaps some story context words that will help them. So the examiner might say here, this is Julia and Peter, they're going for a walk in the forest. Notice that the tenses that I'm suggesting here are present, simple and continuous. So all that learners need to do is really continue talking about the pictures using the present tenses. There's no pressure at movers to use the past tense in the storytelling task. If they want to, of course, they can. But I'm just going to repeat here that if they use the present and simple continuous tenses, that is absolutely great as well. Learners, of course, do, at movers level, they do, of course, know the past simple tense. I put some support questions here that the examiner might ask if learners are less confident about telling any part of the story. So if they stop talking, for example. We'd probably only expect learners to say perhaps 2. It would be great if they could say 3 sentences about each picture, simple sentences. That's plenty. So thinking back to that single picture work, we can see how just describing what people are doing in a picture will help learners prepare for this. The key thing is for learners to have a quick look at all 4 pictures first, but then just talk about what's happening in one picture at a time. Different candidates will tell the stories in different ways, and that's fine. Looking at picture 3, for example, there are lots of ways that learners could talk about what Julia and Peter are doing. So, for example, we could say they're eating, they're smiling, they're sitting on the grass, they're having a picnic, that sort of thing. Because picnic is also a mover's word, just so that you know, if you don't know already. So when you're practicing this kind of task, learners might be more confident about writing sentences about the cartoon first. If so, and as I said, you know your learners best, then you could write questions like these on the board to help learners construct their story in pairs or groups, and then tell others in the class their version of it. And of course, you could walk around and help them with that. You could also use the picture for all kinds of other fun, creative tasks. So instead of writing or telling the story, why not write the play? Learners write what Peter and Julia are saying to each other and then role play their conversation. So for example, Peter is the name of the boy, so I'll give him a deeper voice. I'm not very good at this, but you'll understand, I guess. So Peter says, "Let's sit on that rock." Okay. I've got a text from Dad. It says, "Don't swim in that river." Ha ha, come on, let's have our picnic now. All right, and so on. I apologise for my awful voices. In picture 2, Peter's holding a phone. Learners could imagine what Peter is telling his dad about their day on the phone, and say that in class or write that for homework. Can you see there are all sorts of ways that you can use these pictures in a different way? Have fun with all your creative ideas. Your learners will enjoy them. Okay, in this one, this is the Movers Read-Write story task. This is new for 2018. In 2017, they see a picture and have to answer yes or no to different sentences about it, say whether they're right or wrong. But this has changed for 2018. So we give learners a chance to show what they can write. You can see questions to answer and sentences to complete, just like the ones we've used before. We've talked about questions and we've talked about completing sentences. The gap is always at the end, by the way, as you can see here. At Movers, learners don't have to write a story about the picture. They only have to write 2 sentences about it. They can decide what to write. There are no correct answers, but these 2 sentences must be about the task picture. That's important. And of course, they must be easy to understand. So it's probably better to write a short and clear sentence than an ambitious long one, which might contain unfortunate mistakes. Has anyone got a 1-sentence suggestion? Remember, this level is A1. Can you write a sentence about this story? They would go on the 2 blank lines at the bottom. So what could we say about this story? Sorry, about this picture. Just waiting for an answer. I'll give one first. There is rain on the road. Yeah, all good movers words. I can see rain on the road. There are lots of people in this street, for example. Can we have another one at this level? One person is wearing, oh yeah, we wouldn't want them to say the one person is wearing a yellow coat, probably, because that's already there. There is a red car. Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you very much. To practice this task, pairs could write questions or incomplete sentences about a picture for other pairs to answer or complete. Answers could be longer than one word now, so if they're confident, answers could even be a complete sentence. For example, yeah, remember the question in the bear story that movers, we might expect them to say the bird is flying to the boy. Okay, so here's another couple of creative activities you could use here. Pairs could imagine answers to questions like, where's the girl going on that bike? What's the woman in the yellow coat doing? Thinking about. Why are those two people going into the shop that's got a clown in the window? Or tell me about the person who works in that bread shop. If learners are confident about using the past tense, you could ask, how was this street different at 9 o'clock this morning? They could perhaps complete 5 sentences that begin with, at 9 o'clock, for example, the shops were closed. I suggest this kind of creative activity is done in pairs or groups. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And now we'll look at flyers. So in flyers speaking, learners see 5 cartoon pictures that show a story, so 1 more picture than movers. You can practice this storytelling task in the same way we talked about for the lower level. So learners should listen carefully to the examiner. Remember, she will also here say the name of the story and introduce the context, so what's happening, and she'll talk about what's happening in the first picture. Learners then continue the story in the same way as they did at the lower level. So learners should now be very used to answering what, where, what, doing, who kinds of questions about a single picture. So all they need here to do is to look at one picture at a time. Again, that's my advice to you, and say, for example, where someone is, what they're doing now, who is doing what. You can see the support questions here. If learners are trying to look at all the pictures at the same time, the task might look as big as a mountain. If they just think about talking about each picture in turn, the task will seem much easier. Do remember that these support questions, the learners will not see these on the test paper. These are just questions that the examiner will have in their paperwork to ask if students are struggling a little bit. So if learners can't think of what to say. These slides will be available, of course, online, so you can take time to look at these tasks again. And if you enjoy creating your own teaching materials, I'm sure you can find cartoons online or in comics or other course books to give your class more practice in doing this particular task. Perhaps your students could even draw their own story pictures if you've got an artistic cluster of students. I really enjoy working with students that love to draw and come up with creative ideas. I think that's so important for their futures. Not necessarily to draw, but the creative thinking task work is really, really important now. I say that in everything that I have ever delivered, I think. So here's another cartoon, but here you can only see 3 pictures because this is the new Flyers story writing task. We say write 20 or more words, as you can see. Generally, we've found that when we've asked some A2 learners to try doing these tasks, they often seem to like to write 30, 40 or even 50 words depending on their skills. They won't get any extra marks for writing long stories though. Begin to help learners prepare for this task by showing them the cartoon, and then you could just ask them for key vocabulary, for example, which you could write on the board. You could then divide the class into perhaps 3 groups, A, B and C, and then ask each group to write about what is happening in just one of the pictures. So what is happening in the first picture, the second picture, or the third picture, and the third picture. So it might be really funny to see what the combined story is when groups read out their understanding of each picture. It's important to have fun, and Yeah, not always be too serious about this in class. We want learners to do these kinds of practice tasks stress-free. By the way, do encourage learners to begin talking about pictures 2 and 3 using linking phrases like but then, or now, or suddenly, for example. That will help the story be more cohesive. So learners should write in this task about what's happening in all 3 stages of the picture story. It's probably better to write fewer words accurately than long stories which might contain more errors, as I said before. Okay, what else could you do more creatively with these particular pictures? Well, what about in groups of 5 learners could choose their roles, the 4 people and the bird, because the bird actually, you can't see very clearly here, but the bird actually picks the man's glasses up in the 3rd picture. They could then choose their names and write the dialogue and role play their own version of the story for the rest of the class. It would be fun to give the learner who's playing the older man some pieces of paper to drop. You could also practice using useful phrases beforehand and write those on the board like, oh no, or don't worry. Can you think of any other short useful phrases like oh no or don't worry that an A1 or an A2 level student might know and might be able to use here? Help, perhaps. Can you type them in? Any ideas? Come and help. Okay. Yeah, well, things like quick, come on, we need to help that man. Remember, you can use any picture cartoon story at Flyers to practice storytelling or story writing. So here's a little summary of some ideas you could use for creative thinking work and single pictures. I've just seen come here and hurry for the last task, thank you. This kind of freer practice will give learners more ideas to draw on, more ideas to have in their minds when they're trying to think of what to say or write about a story picture in the test. They'll also become more familiar with just looking at pictures and thinking of ways to talk or write about them. So, for example, here, let's just ask someone to tell us, what are the 2 birds above the dog that's having the bath, thinking, do you think? Perhaps they're saying, quick, fly away, let's go. Or, what else? Bubbles! Okay. I think that's probably a B1 word, but that's fine. Yeah. And what about tell me about the donkeys? What can we say about those 2 donkeys? They're grey. Are they happy donkeys? I hope they are. I really like donkeys. They're eating. Yes, they're eating. They're eating the yellow grass. Okay, thank you. So let's now just look at some more detailed work using just one picture. The more you do this kind of work, the wider your students' imaginations will become, and as I've said, the more ideas they'll have. They'll also enjoy it because it's fun. They can choose their own answers, which is also empowering. If they're choosing their own answers, they'll feel more confident about coming up with their own ideas. So, another thing to remember perhaps is that we all know you'll have children of different ability ranges in the same class. Try to welcome single word answers in the same way that you congratulate learners for longer, more complex answers. That way, even learners who are shy or less able will grow in confidence and improve their fluency in time. Can we have one very short answer to the question about the boy? Where is he going? Where is this boy going? Tell me now. He's going to school. Thank you very much. And a more complex one? Can we have a more complex one? So we'd say, yes, great, he's going to school. Well done. Now let's have a more complex one. Where is the boy going? He's going to visit his grandmother. Perfect. Many thanks. Perfect. So we'd congratulate both answers. And another idea, speculating about what happens next. I'll let you read this. let's imagine, so as we've just decided, he's at school now. So we could answer the question, what is he doing? And we could ask that question in class, and learners might say, he's writing. That would be a simple question, a simple answer. Or he's borrowing a book from his friend, which would be a much more complex answer. Okay, so can you see? You would welcome both in the same way. So we now need to build on skills. We've got two pictures here. I'll just give you a minute to read this. Can you again see how giving learners these simple support questions in class will help prepare them to think of different things to say or write about the pictures when they're doing the test? I'll just let you read that for the moment. In pairs or groups, of course, or if you like your learners to work on their own, of course they could answer those questions on their own. So they could write the answers or give the answers out in open class. So we'll move now to the next slide. So then, of course, we progress to showing 3 or 4 cartoon stories. More ideas. So you could show the cartoon for a few seconds and then take it away. We could ask learners if they remember what they saw, elicit the key story words and write them on the board. Then show the cartoon again. And then working in pairs, for example, they could write their own support questions. So they're actively preparing themselves to think about those support questions and then to discuss the answers in different pairs or groups. And then to take turns to tell their version of the story. Write the story perhaps, and of course expand the story, adding little bits of conversation like we did just now. Hurry up, or come on, or help, or oh no, or don't worry for homework. Okay, so here's a summary of some of the ideas we've talked about, including some test tips to help learners do their best. So do you remember I said it's really important in the speaking test that learners listen carefully to the examiner's questions about the picture. There are the question types. And learners could try to give 2 or 3 answers to the tell me about question. They can be short. We covered that. Starters writing 1-word answers about each picture. We're practicing their spellings, of course, here. Not only their understanding of the question, but also can they spell the word. Movers and flyers speaking. Look at the pictures quickly. Listen carefully to the name of the story because that will give you an idea of what it's about. Don't try to be J.K. Rowling. Simple and clear is fine. Try to answer those imagined support questions when in the writing test. Try to use a linking word perhaps as well in one of the sentences, like because, and, or but. And remember the linking words between the second and the third picture. And the first and the second picture, like and then, but now, those kinds of words. Okay, great. So, activity types, a few more ideas. Do revisit the webinar to read these activity types again, to read about or listen to these activity types again. But we've covered a lot of these already. I'd like to just look at points 4, 5, 8, 9 and 10 here. So if we look at 4, remember the businessman cartoon? Learners could pretend that they work in the building, so they could describe what they saw and perhaps add what happened afterwards. Or they could pretend to be one of the children who helped pick up the paper and write their diary entry for that day. That might be a movers or a flyers activity. Too difficult for starters. Point 5, the businessman cartoon again. Imagine all 4 characters have mobiles, and instead of talking, they write text messages to each other or to their friends about what's happening. Of course, we might all be communicating like that in 20 years' time, who knows? So they write a single text message that explains the situation, or they could choose to be one of the characters and write a message to one of the other characters to which they get a reply. For example, if you remember, help in one message, and the reply might be okay, or something more complicated, like I've just fallen over in the street. That, of course, is a flyers sentence. And then the reply might be, oh dear, are you all right? That's a movers level. Or let's help that man. That's movers. And then the reply might be, but I don't want to be late for school, which is a flyer's answer. But you get the idea, I think. Point 8, play a piece of musical instrument. Play a piece of instrumental musical. Oh, golly, let's start again. Play a piece of instrumental music. Learners imagine what's happening. You know, perhaps a storm is coming or people are walking through a wood. Encourage them to discuss what they are experiencing when they're listening to that music. Tell or write the story. Point 9, I love doing this. Ask learners to close their eyes and imagine they're walking through a wood. Ask, what can you see, hear, smell, feel? Learners answer these questions only in their imaginations. And when they leave the wood, you tell them to leave the wood, you ask the same questions. Learners, again, answer them in their imaginations. They then open their eyes and share their experiences in pairs or groups. They could write about their journey for homework, for example, and of course everybody's will be different. I really enjoy celebrating difference in class. For point 10, sometimes I ask people to draw a continuous line on a piece of paper. They then turn the piece of paper and look at it in a slightly different way. Can they see 3 things in their drawing? If any of you know the story Big Nose and the Storm Maker, in Story Fun Edition 1, that's where you'd find it. This is how I got the idea for that one. I saw a nose, a wave, and a lightning bolt. When children have their 3 things, they write 20 or 30 words using all 3 in their very short story. Help them with this to begin with, but they'll soon get better at this kind of improvisation work. Okay, so was there anything else that I wanted to cover there? Point 8, very, very quickly, use realia. Do you remember the first photograph? I actually give children a table full of little things to choose, and then they put them on the floor, and children will automatically put them in groups. And then we sit around. Other children are not allowed to move anything that's already there. They take turns to put these things on the floor. And then we sit around this wonderful, amazing white sheet with all these things on it, which we will see in little groups, and then children imagine little stories about each group. Or just simply, you know, what is that toy dolphin saying to that ring or that pencil? Or what is that pencil going to write? All sorts of really weird and wonderful activities. Okay, so here we just see some of the things that I've just talked about. For information about my first photo, you could find also my IATEFL talk where I explain how that works more fully. I think we're running out of time a little bit, so I will continue now. And that talk will also give more information about some of the points I've made in this webinar. My blog will too. I'm hoping that you'll find a link to that. I'll make sure that you do. Okay, so just a few thoughts to end with. The stories and story tasks in the Wiley teaching material and practice tests should allow for all these things in your classroom. Lots of creativity, lots of opportunities for pair and group work, a possibility for everybody to say something or contribute to class activities. We know that the language will be useful because it will be hopefully the language that they're going to need in the test, but if not, that's wonderful too. Motivational, they'll enjoy it because it's fun and creative. Children naturally enjoy doing activities like that. All 4 skills, we can use any visual to prompt spoken or written single sentence or short story work. We can create different stories. You can use a formulaic story plot stage for that. I'll talk about that because I've noticed that one of the questions is about that, which I'll answer after Jenny's given you some information about some teaching material. And we know that story work provides practice for children who learn in different ways. Those children who love working visually or aurally or kinesthetically. And again, I think I talk more about that in some of the other webinars that you might find online. Of course, there'll also be creative, collaborative, communicative, those big buzzwords, and fun. So my last thoughts. It's really, really important that our young story makers understand what's happening and think, I can do this. You can always use L1 to check that they understand what they've got to do. I think that is a good reason to use L1 at certain times. They should feel confident that they can add something of their own. That's empowering. They should know that they're being taught the right language to talk about their own lives and interests. So child-focused or age-focused. Remember the age of your particular class of learners, and do different activities in their minds and bodies. That's so important that they have movement. So here I've got some websites which will help you. Again, you can check out these websites at your leisure. And oops, I'm just going to go back because now I'm going to hand over to Jenny to talk a little bit about some teaching and testing materials that we think might help you. Okay, Jenny, over to you.
Many thanks for such an interesting session, Karen. Now, we'll shortly be moving to our question and answer session, so please type any questions you have for Karen in the chat box. And while you're thinking, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Cambridge materials that will help you with the revised Young Learners tests. Okay, so firstly, Story Fun is the series which Karen Saxby has written, and it's now in its second edition, ready for the revised 2018 tests. This series has 6 levels, 2 books for each test. There are 8 stories per level, which form the basis for the English learning. This then develops into integrated skills practice, including speaking, to prepare students for test tasks. It now also includes a home fun booklet for each level, which helps bridge the gap between home and school and involves parents in their child's learning. And then, I seem to have skipped a slide there. Okay. Then we have Fun for Starters, Movers and Flyers. This is also co-authored by Karen, and it's now in its 4th edition. As with Story Fun, these 3 books work really well alongside a general English course, and they fully cover the Young Learners test syllabus. They come with online activities for students and a fun vocabulary app. This is the full suite of preparation materials for the revised exams. So in addition to Story Fun and Fun 4, you'll see we also have Kids Box and practice tests. Kids Box Updated 2nd edition is a 7-level primary course, now with officially validated content which prepares students for the revised exams. It also has many features that you'd expect from a general English course, so a CLIL project, social values, phonics and online practice. And finally, Starters, Movers and Flyers practice tests. Again, these are all new for the revised exams. Lastly, we've created a World of Fun website which is dedicated to the 2018 test changes. This is our online hub for information, resources and teaching tips such as videos. It's also the easiest place to find out more about the preparation materials we've just mentioned if you do want more information. So, now I'm going to hand back to Karen to answer some of your questions.
I don't know if you can hear me. Yes, can you hear me? Yes, great. So we've had a few questions here that I'd like to cover. So one question about using the past tense questions and not only present simple and continuous for A1 students. Absolutely, yes, because they know the present past. They know the the past simple tense at A1. Not the past continuous though, that comes in at A2, so absolutely go for it. If your students are up for it, yes. How is writing one word judging students' writing? I think I mentioned that when they are answering the questions in the starters reading and writing test, we are testing spellings and of course understanding those questions. So that is how we judge their writing. Any tips or sources that we can access to get tips on how to tell stories ourselves? I think if you do an online search, you'd probably find quite a lot of useful ideas. So, for example, an interesting, a very simple way to do this is by creating a very simplistic plot. So talk about the characters, the initial context, where they are, and then probably a problem of some sort. A problem that they have to resolve. We don't know, what the problem is. We don't want it to be a scary problem, but there's always something that happens in a story that creates a problem, and then there is a resolution. Think of every single James Bond film you've ever seen, because of course films are stories too, as I've said. There's an oh no sort of moment, and then a phew, he's all right sort of moment. I always think of it a little bit like a heartbeat. It's a sort of an open and a closing, and an open and a closing. And then we like to end the story, of course, with a happy ending. But you'll find lots and lots of information about that online. And if any of you are avid readers and want to read a really thick book, I recommend highly the book by Christopher Booker, so that's a nice easy surname to remember, called The 7 Essential Plots. It's the most amazing book, and it analyses so many stories, hundreds and hundreds of stories and film plots, to show you that there are only really 7 types of story plots. It's a fascinating book to read. Does the Wiley curriculum keep changing every year? No, it's every 4 or 5 years. So you don't have to worry about things changing all the time. Why shouldn't teachers ask pre-questions to introduce a story? I think I made it clear that that's my preference. I just personally like students to hear a story without having to think too hard. So they just use those imaginations and that sort of accidental way of learning the ways that words are strung together, having a guess at what new words might mean. I think very often if you get a pre-hearing task, which obviously that technique we use a lot, but it very much focuses on the language in that particular task rather than letting children just enjoy the story. But again, that is my preference. You said by accident, what do you mean by that? Okay, so I mean that just like in first language acquisition, when we learnt our first language, a 5-year-old doesn't consciously think, wow, I've learnt the third conditional today, or what the word let me think, vegetarian means. So language is just heard or read, and with references to its environment, if you like, in the sentence, and the way that it works with other, words. It's stored that way in groups in our mental lexicons. So when it's heard another time, which is why stories for young learners use such a lot of repetition, the word and its semantics, is it the name of something, is it a doing word, are reinforced. Slowly but surely, and without any conscious learning, the word or grammar point becomes familiar. I had a little 2.5-year-old girl here yesterday who is Austrian, and I was just pointing to the cat and saying, look at the cat's in the garden. And within 2 seconds, she was saying the word cat. She had analysed what she'd heard and learnt the word. So another thing, why is it good to work in pairs or groups? I think this will probably be the last answer. Is that correct, everybody? I think that's probably, we've only got time for one more. So because this gives learners more time to talk, because it means we move from teacher talking time to student talking time, which we need to do if we're preparing for speaking tests, of course. It also allows learners to mix and collaborate, to work with other students, which is good practice for teamwork, both as young students, older students, and of course when they become adults. It also changes the dynamic of the lesson. Children like to move in their heads and bodies, which I think I said before. And it teaches them to listen to somebody else's point of view, which I also think is really, really good for their communication skill building. I also think that it's empowering. They're choosing what to say, they are choosing what to say or how to complete a task. And one child isn't given the full responsibility for the work. I think that's important too. So give them a set time for the task if you're worried about losing control. Because if the class, if the class gets noisy, I know it can be very worrying for the teacher and perhaps for other teachers. You can always move learners into corners of the classroom where they can talk quietly, perhaps. But we are trying to teach them to work autonomously, to be independent learners. This is our job, I think, as teachers. Sometimes it's fun to get pairs to take turns at being the teacher and being the student. And of course, you could monitor quietly to make sure they're using English. Don't stop them talking. Put any mistakes in your back pocket to deal with later, because we don't want to stop their fluency, really. Sometimes learners pick the wrong partner. But working in pairs can be really, really motivating for some children, depending upon where you are and what they're used to. I think that's probably all we've got time for today. And I would just like to say I've really enjoyed delivering this webinar. It's work that I feel very passionate about, as you've probably understood. And I wish everybody a lot of fun in their young learners' classrooms. So bye for now, signing off. Oh, by the way, I did put up my blog address. That's not live yet, but it will be quite soon. So thank you everybody for taking the time to actually watch our webinar. And as I've said again, have fun. Bye.
Okay, thank you, Karen. That is all we've got time for today. So if anyone would like more ideas for preparing children for the Young Learners Test, don't forget to visit World of Fun. That's the website on the screen for our most up-to-the-minute tips and resources. It's where we'll be showing a recording of this webinar, and it's where you'll see recordings of some other webinars. Big thank you to Karen for such an engaging webinar with so many great ideas, and we hope you'll join us for our next one sometimes too. Bye.